What happens when arrogance meets quiet power at 40,000 feet? In the exclusive, hushed world of private aviation, Elliot Vance believed his money bought him not just a seat, but the right to judge everyone around him. When he saw a plainly dressed black woman in the seat he wanted, he saw an easy target for his derision. He laughed, he mocked, and he demanded. But he was about to learn that the quietest people often have the loudest power. He thought he was putting a nobody in her place. In reality, he was about to dismantle his entire world, one condescending word at a time. This isn't just a story about a flight. It's about a crash landing of character and the shocking karma that followed. The private terminal at Teterboro Airport was a cathedral of quiet efficiency, a place where the air itself seemed to be filtered through money. The scent of expensive leather and freshly brewed espresso hung in the spacious lounge, where polished marble floors reflected the soft, recessed lighting. It was a world designed to insulate its patrons from the mundane chaos of commercial travel, a sanctuary for the 1%. And in this sanctuary, Elliot Vance was holding court. "Can you believe this place?" he said, his voice a notch too loud for the serene environment. He gestured with a dismissive wave of his hand, the platinum band of his watch catching the light. You pay a fortune for privacy, and they still let the general public wander in. His girlfriend, Tiffany Astor, let out a tinkling laugh that sounded more practiced than genuine. She was a vision of curated perfection, from her pristine white Chanel blazer to the calculated pout of her lips. "Don't be so dramatic, Elle. It's probably just a charter mix-up. Some C-list musician thinking he's a big shot." Elliot's gaze was fixed on a woman sitting by the floor-to-ceiling windows. She was engrossed in a thick, dog-eared paperback, her expression one of calm concentration. She wore simple, comfortable-looking grey travel pants, a soft navy blue sweater, and practical flat shoes. Her hair was styled in elegant, intricate braids that fell over her shoulder. To Elliot, her entire presence was an affront, a smudge on the pristine canvas of his exclusive experience. She didn't belong. He was Elliot Vance, Executive Vice President of Vance Holdings, a sprawling real estate and logistics empire built by his grandfather and ruthlessly expanded by his father, Richard Vance. Elliot had never known a world that didn't bend to his will. His life was a series of seamless transitions, from one luxurious bubble to another: the penthouse apartment on Park Avenue, the corner office with panoramic views of Manhattan, the summer home in the Hamptons, and this, the leased Gulfstream G650, waiting on the tarmac to whisk him and Tiffany to a weekend of skiing in Aspen. "Look at her," Elliot muttered to Tiffany, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was still perfectly audible to anyone within 10 feet. "Reading a book, a physical book. How quaint. Probably a freebie from the airport library." Tiffany giggled again, leaning into him. Maybe she won a competition. Be a billionaire for a day. First prize is a flight to Newark. Second prize is a flight on this jet. Their laughter, sharp and cruel, cut through the quiet hum of the lounge. The woman didn't look up from her book, but a subtle tension in her shoulders suggested she had heard them. She simply turned a page, her focus seemingly unbroken. This infuriated Elliot even more. His power, his very presence, was built on being acknowledged, feared, or at the very least, noticed. To be ignored by someone he deemed so far beneath him was an insult. Her name was Serafina James, and while Elliot Vance had been born on third base, convinced he'd hit a triple, Serafina had built the entire stadium from scratch. She was the founder and CEO of Etherian Dynamics, a revolutionary green technology firm that was single-handedly disrupting the global energy sector. Her company's patented carbon capture technology and hyper-efficient solar materials were poised to change the world. Fortune magazine had dubbed her the quiet architect of tomorrow. She was a billionaire several times over, but she wore her wealth like a well-tailored, invisible coat. It was there for her own comfort and purpose, not for public display. She was flying to Aspen to visit Dr. Aris Thorne, her former physics professor and mentor, who was in the final stages of a battle with cancer. It was a personal, somber trip, and she had dressed for comfort, not for an audience. The book she was reading was a worn copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, a gift from Aris years ago. Its stoic wisdom was a balm on her anxious heart. A uniformed attendant approached Elliot and Tiffany. "Mr. Vance, your aircraft is ready for boarding." Elliot stood, stretching with an air of theatrical importance. "It's about time," he said, handing his briefcase to the attendant, as if it were a royal scepter. He glanced one last time at Serafina. "Let's hope we don't have to share the cabin with the competition winner," he sneered to Tiffany. As they walked towards the glass doors leading to the tarmac, Serafina finally looked up. Her eyes, deep and intelligent, followed them for a moment. There was no anger in her gaze, only a quiet, weary assessment. It was a look she was all too familiar with, the casual dismissal, the snap judgment based on her race, her gender, her unassuming clothes. For years it had fueled her ambition. Now it just made her tired. She sighed, placed a thin leather bookmark between the pages, and closed her book. She stood up, her movements fluid and unhurried. Another attendant approached her with a deferential nod. "Ms. James, we are ready whenever you are. Captain Rostova has the flight plan filed and we're just waiting for you." "Thank you, Michael," Serafina said, her voice calm and melodic. "I'm ready now." She walked towards the same glass doors, her path set on a collision course with the Vances, who were busy taking selfies on the tarmac in front of the gleaming white jet. Elliot, a self-satisfied smirk plastered on his face, was completely oblivious to the fact that the woman he had just mocked wasn't just another passenger. She was the one who owned the plane. The interior of the Gulfstream Chase 650, which Serafina had personally christened the Stratos 9, was a masterpiece of understated luxury. The cabin was configured for 8 passengers, with plush cream-colored leather seats, polished dark walnut trim, and soft, indirect lighting that created a serene, calming ambiance. A fully stocked galley gleamed at the front, and a private stateroom was situated at the rear. Every detail, from the thread count of the cashmere blankets to the weight of the crystal glasses, had been chosen by Serafina herself. It was her sanctuary in the sky, a place for work, reflection, and quiet transit. Elliot Vance, however, treated it like a newly conquered territory. He tossed his jacket onto one seat, plopped into another, and immediately began barking orders at the flight attendant, a poised and professional woman named Clara. "I'll have a Macallan 25, neat. And make sure the ice is in a separate glass. I hate it when it gets watered down. Tiffany? What do you want, darling? Champagne? Get her the best you have. Cristal, preferably." "Of course, Mr. Vance," Clara replied, her smile tight but unwavering. "We have a Dom Perignon 2012 on board." "Fine, that will have to do," Elliot said with a sigh of immense suffering. Tiffany settled into the seat opposite him, already scrolling through her phone, no doubt crafting the perfect Instagram caption for the selfie she'd just taken. The two of them were an island of noisy entitlement in the otherwise tranquil cabin. At that moment, Serafina stepped onto the aircraft. She gave Clara a small, warm smile of acknowledgement. "Clara, it's good to see you. How is your mother doing?" "Much better, Miss James, thank you for asking," Clara said, her entire demeanor softening with genuine warmth. "The specialist you recommended has been wonderful." "I'm so glad to hear that," Serafina replied. Elliot's head snapped up at the sound of her voice. His eyes widened in theatrical disbelief as he saw the woman from the lounge. "You have got to be kidding me," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. He looked at Clara. "What is she doing here? I thought this was a private charter." Before Clara could answer, Serafina walked past them, heading towards the two most spacious seats at the front of the main cabin section, which faced each other with a large, retractable table between them. This was her preferred spot for working during flights. She placed her small carry-on bag on one seat and was about to sit in the other when Elliot shot to his feet. "Whoa, whoa, whoa, hold on a minute," he said, stepping in front of her to block her path. "That's my seat." Serafina looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then she looked at the seat, a spacious, plush armchair upholstered in the finest Italian leather. "I'm sorry," she said calmly. "I believe all the seats are unassigned. This is simply where I prefer to sit." Elliot let out a short, incredulous laugh. He turned to Tiffany. "Did you hear that? She prefers to sit here." He turned back to Serafina, his face a mask of condescension. "Listen, sweetheart, I don't know how you got on this plane. Maybe you're a friend of the crew. Maybe you're a caterer who got lost. But these two seats," he gestured to the pair, "are the primary seats. They belong to the person who is paying for the flight. That person is me, so why don't you be a good girl and go find a spot in the back? Maybe near the lavatory." Tiffany snickered from her seat, covering her mouth with perfectly manicured fingers. The air in the cabin grew thick with tension. Clara, the flight attendant, stepped forward anxiously. "Mr. Vance, sir, perhaps there's been a misunderstanding." Elliot waved her away dismissively. No misunderstanding at all. Just a simple matter of putting people in their proper place." "Now," he said, turning his full, patronizing attention back to Serafina, "the back of the plane. Chop, chop." Serafina didn't move. She held his gaze, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to his blustering arrogance. For a moment, she considered just walking away, taking another seat to avoid the confrontation. It would be the easier path. But then she thought of her mentor, Aris, a man who had taught her to never shrink, to never allow others to diminish her hard-won space in the world. She thought of the countless times she had been underestimated, spoken over, and dismissed in boardrooms dominated by men exactly like Elliot Vance, and a quiet, steely resolve settled over her. She took a slow breath. "You are mistaken on 2 points," she said, her voice even and clear, cutting through his arrogance like a diamond blade. Elliot's smirk faltered. "Excuse me." "First," Serafina continued, "you are not paying for this flight. Nobody is. There is no charter fee because this is not a charter plane." Elliot's face began to flush with anger. "What the hell are you talking about? I have the confirmation right here." He started fumbling for his phone. Serafina held up a hand, a simple gesture that commanded him to stop. "And that brings me to the second point. You think that's your seat?" She paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a beat, her eyes never leaving his. Then she delivered the final, devastating blow. "You're wrong. This is my seat. All of them are." She gestured around the luxurious cabin. "Because I don't just pay for the flight. I own this jet." The silence that followed Serafina's declaration was absolute. It was so profound that the low hum of the jet's auxiliary power unit seemed to roar in the stillness. Elliot Vance stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape, the condescending smirk wiped clean from his face and replaced with a mask of stunned, slack-jawed disbelief. Tiffany was the first to break the silence. She let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "Oh, that's a good one. Very funny. I own this jet." "Elle, she's delusional." But Elliot wasn't laughing. He was looking at Serafina's eyes. There was no trace of a bluff, no hint of a joke. There was only the cold, hard certainty of a fact being stated. He then looked at the flight attendant, Clara, expecting her to intervene, to call security, to do something. Instead, Clara was studiously avoiding his gaze, her expression a mixture of professional neutrality and what looked suspiciously like relief. "You're lying," Elliot finally managed to stammer, though the words lacked conviction. You can't." "Can't what, Mr. Vance?" Serafina asked, her tone still unnervingly calm. "Can't be a black woman and own a G650? Is that what you're struggling with?" The directness of the question hit him like a physical blow. The blood drained from his face, then rushed back, coloring his cheeks a deep, mottled red. "That's not... I never said that." "You didn't have to," Serafina replied softly. Just then, the cockpit door opened, and a woman in a crisp pilot's uniform with captain's stripes on her epaulettes stepped into the cabin. She had a commanding presence, with sharp, intelligent eyes, and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun. This was Captain Eva Rostova, a former Air Force pilot with thousands of flight hours and an unshakable demeanor. "Is there a problem here, Ms. James?" Captain Rostova asked, her voice calm but with an underlying edge of steel. Her eyes swept over the scene, taking in Elliot's aggressive posture and Serafina's quiet stillness. Elliot saw his chance. Here was the authority figure. "Yes, Captain," he said, pointing a trembling finger at Serafina. "There is a problem. This woman is a stowaway. She's claiming she owns the plane. She needs to be removed immediately." Captain Rostova's gaze shifted to Elliot. She looked him up and down, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to Serafina, and her entire demeanor changed. A small, respectful smile touched her lips. "Ms. James," she said, her tone deferential, "my apologies for the disturbance. We are cleared for departure as soon as you are settled. Will your guests be needing anything before takeoff?" The words, "your guests," hung in the air, each one a hammer blow to Elliot's crumbling reality. He stared, dumbfounded, as the captain of the aircraft addressed the woman in the travel pants as the owner. It was impossible. It couldn't be real. "Thank you, Eva," Serafina said. "I'll be settled in a moment. Please proceed with pre-flight." "Right away, ma'am," Captain Rostova said with a crisp nod. She gave Elliot one last, withering look before turning and disappearing back into the cockpit. The truth crashed down on Elliot Vance with the force of a physical impact. He staggered back a step, his mind reeling. The woman he'd mocked, the woman he'd tried to order to the back of the plane like a servant, was Serafina James, the Serafina James, founder of Etherian Dynamics, the tech titan his father had been obsessing over for months. A cold, sickening dread began to pool in his stomach, a dread so profound it was almost paralyzing. Vance Holdings was in trouble, deep trouble. Their portfolio was heavily invested in old-world industries, commercial real estate, fossil fuel logistics, traditional manufacturing. In a world rapidly pivoting to sustainable green technology, they were a dinosaur sinking in a tar pit. Their stock was plummeting, and investors were getting nervous. Their only lifeline, the one Richard Vance had been chasing with desperate, single-minded focus for the past 6 months, was a partnership with Etherian Dynamics. They desperately needed to license Serafina James's patented carbon-scrubbing technology to retrofit their properties and logistics fleets. It was more than a deal. It was a survival plan. They had submitted a comprehensive, multi-billion-dollar proposal 3 weeks ago, and were anxiously awaiting a response. His father had told him in no uncertain terms, "This Etherian deal is everything, Elliot. Without it, we could lose the company. Do not do anything to jeopardize it." And what had he done? He had just stood in her private jet, in front of her crew, and called the single most important person to his family's survival sweetheart, mocked her clothes, and tried to banish her to the back of her own plane. The Macallan 25 he had demanded earlier suddenly seemed like a distant, impossible dream. He felt a desperate need for a drink, but the thought of asking for one now was mortifying. Tiffany, who had been watching the exchange with wide, confused eyes, finally seemed to grasp the magnitude of the situation. The color drained from her face. She looked from Elliot's horrified expression to Seraphina's calm, composed face. "Oh my God, Elliot," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Is that her?" Elliot couldn't answer. He could only stare at Seraphina James, who had now taken her seat by the window and was buckling her seatbelt, as if the last 10 minutes had been nothing more than a minor, forgettable inconvenience. He had thought he was a giant in a world of ants. He had just realized he was an ant who had tried to pick a fight with a god. And judgment was coming. The takeoff was flawlessly smooth. The Gulf Stream ascended with a powerful, quiet grace, banking over the dense sprawl of New Jersey before heading west towards the heart of the country. Below, the world shrank into a patchwork of insignificant shapes and colors. Inside the cabin, however, the world had shrunk to the unbearable space between Elliot Vance and Seraphina James. Elliot had stumbled back to his seat, collapsing into the leather with the dead weight of a man who had just witnessed his own execution. The cabin, which had felt like his personal kingdom minutes before, now felt like a gilded cage, a pressurized chamber of his own humiliation. He stared blankly out the window, but he didn't see the clouds. He saw the face of his father, Richard, contorted in a mask of apoplectic rage. He heard the words, "You've ruined us," echoing in his mind. Tiffany was no help. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. She wasn't looking at him with sympathy. She was looking at him as if he were a bad investment. "How could you be so stupid, Elliot?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that carried easily across the cabin. "You had to play the big shot, didn't you? You just had to." "I didn't know it was her," he mumbled, his own voice sounding hollow and pathetic. "That's the point," Tiffany snapped back. "You don't have to know. You're just supposed to not be a condescending pig to strangers. What is wrong with you?" Every word was a fresh turn of the knife. He wanted to scream at her, to tell her to shut up, but he had no energy, no fight left in him. She was right. He had done this to himself. His entire life, his arrogance had been a shield, a weapon. He had never once considered that it could backfire so spectacularly. Meanwhile, at the front of the cabin, Seraphina James worked. She had opened her laptop and donned a pair of noise-cancelling headphones, not to listen to music, but to create a bubble of focus. She was a picture of serene productivity, her fingers flying across the keyboard, her eyes scanning complex financial models and engineering schematics on the screen. To Elliot, her calm was a form of torture. It was a clear demonstration that he was so insignificant to her that his monumental, life-altering blunder hadn't even registered as a blip on her radar. She wasn't angry or vengeful. She was, it seemed, completely indifferent. And that was so much worse. Clara, the flight attendant, moved through the cabin with quiet grace, a model of professional discretion. She offered them drinks and refreshments. Tiffany accepted a glass of champagne with a curt nod. Elliot just shook his head, unable to speak. The thought of putting anything in his stomach made him feel ill. About an hour into the flight, Serafina removed her headphones and initiated a video call. Elliot, a morbid moth drawn to a flame, couldn't help but watch and listen. A man's face appeared on her screen. "Serafina, good to see you. How's the flight?" "Smooth so far, David," she replied. "Thanks for making time. I wanted to follow up on the Vance Holdings proposal." Elliot's heart stopped. David. He knew that name. David Chen, Chief Financial Officer of Etherian Dynamics, a legendary, razor-sharp analyst. This was it. "Ah, yes," David Chen said, his expression grim. "The anchor tied to a sinking ship. I've run the numbers again. Their debt-to-asset ratio is even worse than we thought. Their infrastructure is ancient. Honestly, Serafina, partnering with them would be like performing a blood transfusion on a corpse. We'd just be draining our own resources, trying to revive them." Every word was a nail in Elliot's coffin. He felt Tiffany's eyes on him, burning with contempt. "My thoughts exactly," Serafina said, her voice betraying no emotion. "Their corporate culture also gives me pause. There's a certain legacy arrogance there that I don't believe aligns with our values at Etherian. We're forward-thinking, collaborative. They seem regressive." Legacy arrogance. She was talking about him. She was describing him, and by extension, his father and his grandfather. The entire Vance dynasty, summed up in one dismissive phrase. "I agree," David Chen said. "So we're passing? I'll have legal draft the official rejection letter." Serafina was quiet for a long moment. She glanced up from her screen, and for a fraction of a second, her eyes met Elliot's. It was an accidental, fleeting connection. But in that moment, Elliot felt an overwhelming, desperate urge to say something, to apologize, to beg, to explain. But his throat was closed, his tongue a leaden weight in his mouth. Then Serafina's gaze returned to her screen. "Yes, David," she said, her voice firm and decisive. "Draft the letter. Let's make it official. Vance Holdings is not a fit for Etherian Dynamics. Let's move on." The call ended. Serafina closed her laptop. The decision had been made. Just like that. A multi-billion-dollar deal, the only hope for his family's company, erased in a 30-second conversation at 40,000 feet. And he, Elliot Vance, had been the catalyst. He hadn't just jeopardized the deal, he had personally handed Serafina James the exact justification she needed to kill it. He had personified the legacy arrogance she found so distasteful. He had become the living embodiment of everything wrong with his own company. He finally understood. This wasn't just a social blunder. This was a corporate assassination, and he had supplied the weapon, aimed it at his own family, and pulled the trigger. The rest of the flight to Aspen stretched before him, not as a journey of a few hours, but as an eternity spent in a free-fall. He had initiated himself. The atmosphere in the cabin for the remainder of the flight was colder than the air outside the triple-paned windows. It was a silence born not of peace, but of profound and irreparable social death. Elliot felt like a ghost, trapped in a luxurious purgatory of his own making. He was physically present, but in every way that mattered, he had ceased to exist. He replayed the scene in the terminal, the boarding, the confrontation, over and over in his mind. Each memory was a fresh wave of nausea. His own words echoed back at him, dripping with a casual cruelty he now found monstrous. Sweetheart. A good girl. Chop, chop. Who was that person? It was him. He had built that persona, piece by piece, over a lifetime of privilege, a swaggering caricature of power. And he had never once questioned it, until this very moment. Now, watching the genuine article, The quiet, unshakable power of Seraphina James. He saw his own performance for what it was. A cheap, pathetic imitation. Tiffany had moved to a seat further back in the cabin, physically distancing herself from his failure. She was furiously texting, her thumbs flying across her phone's screen. Elliot knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that she was re-engineering her entire weekend. She was likely texting friends in Aspen, explaining the situation, detaching herself from him, ensuring she would land on her feet. She was an expert at survival in their world, and the first rule was to cut dead weight loose. He was dead weight. The most agonizing part was Seraphina's complete composure. After ending her call with David Chen, she didn't gloat or cast a triumphant look in his direction. She simply requested a cup of chamomile tea from Clara, reopened her worn copy of Meditations, and began to read. She was so thoroughly unbothered by him. His presence was a nullity. The catastrophic implications of his actions were, for her, merely a business decision, a loose end now neatly tied up. She had moved on before the plane had even begun its descent. He, on the other hand, was trapped. He found himself studying her, trying to understand the person he had so casually dismissed. He saw the way she thanked Clara for the tea, making eye contact and using her name. He noticed the focused intensity with which she read, her brow furrowed slightly in concentration. He saw a person of substance, of depth, a person who moved through the world with a purpose that had nothing to do with impressing others. She was everything he wasn't. Desperation began to claw its way up his throat. He had to do something. He couldn't just sit here and let his world collapse. He had to apologize. It was a foreign concept to him, a genuine, heartfelt apology. The apologies he had issued in the past were strategic maneuvers, empty words designed to smooth over a business deal or placate his father. But this felt different. This required a level of humility he wasn't sure he possessed. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood, his legs feeling unsteady. He took a step forward into the space between their seats. "Ms. James?" he began, his voice raspy and unfamiliar to his own ears. Seraphina looked up from her book, her expression neutral. She didn't speak, just waited, her gaze steady and patient. I wanted to apologize," he stammered, the words feeling like gravel in his mouth, "for my behavior earlier. It was inexcusable, appalling. I was completely out of line. I am truly sorry." He waited for a reaction, a nod of acceptance, a word of forgiveness, perhaps even a flash of anger. He got none of it. "Why are you apologizing, Mr. Vance?" she asked, her voice quiet but piercing. "Are you sorry because your behavior was inherently wrong? Or are you sorry because you found out who I was?" The question eviscerated him. It cut straight through his clumsy attempt at contrition and laid his motives bare. He couldn't answer because he knew the honest answer was the latter. He was sorry because of the consequences. If she had been a caterer, a competition winner, an ordinary person, he wouldn't have given his behavior a second thought. The apology was for himself, not for her. He struggled, but the words wouldn't come. She saved him from having to lie. "Your apology is noted, Mr. Vance," she said, a hint of finality in her tone. It was a dismissal, not an absolution. She was acknowledging the words, but not the sentiment behind them, because she knew it wasn't there. She had looked into his soul and seen the bankrupt, self-serving motive for his sudden remorse. She then did something that was, in its own way, more devastating than any angry tirade could have been. She reached for her laptop, opened it, and began to type. Elliot stood there, awkwardly, a man dismissed. After a moment, He saw that she was composing an email. The recipient was dChenetheriandynamics.com. The subject line was clear and concise. Vance Holdings proposal. Final decision. She typed quickly and efficiently. He could only see snippets of the text, but the words he saw burned themselves into his memory. Confirmed my assessment. Culture of arrogance. Fundamentally incompatible with Etherian's core principles. Lack of basic respect and decency. Indicative of deeper systemic issues. Please send the official rejection notice to Richard Vance's office immediately. There is no need to wait until Monday. I want this matter concluded today. She hit send. The click of the touchpad was the sound of the guillotine blade falling. She had done it right in front of him. Not out of malice, but out of sheer efficiency. He was a task to be completed, a box to be checked. His family's legacy, his own future, all of it was just an email she had sent before finishing her cup of tea. Defeated, Elliot turned and walked back to his seat. He was no longer just the cause of the problem. He was now the architect of his family's ruin, and he had a front row seat for the demolition. The landing in Aspen was as smooth as the takeoff, but for Elliot it felt like a violent crash. The moment the wheels of the Gulfstream touched the tarmac of Aspen-Pitkin County Airport, the insulated bubble of the flight popped, exposing him to the harsh, cold reality of the world he had just broken. The cabin door opened. A blast of crisp, thin mountain air flooded the interior. For Serafina, it was the smell of respite, a welcome change from the recycled air of travel. For Elliot, it smelled of judgment. Serafina stood and gathered her things with the same unhurried grace she had displayed throughout the entire ordeal. She slipped her book into her bag and shrugged on a light jacket. Clara, Ava, thank you for a wonderful flight, she said to the crew. I'll see you both on Sunday morning. She walked to the door and paused, turning slightly. She looked not at Elliot, but at Tiffany. Miss Astor, she said, her voice devoid of any malice, a simple statement of fact. A word of advice. The company you keep is a reflection of your own character. Choose wisely. With that, she descended the stairs and walked towards a sleek, black Escalade that was waiting for her on the tarmac. A man who Elliot recognized as Dr. Aris Thorne's longtime caregiver was holding the door for her. She got in, and the car pulled away, disappearing from view. She was gone, moving on with her life, leaving Elliot in the wreckage of his. The spell was broken. Tiffany shot to her feet, her face a mask of cold fury. She grabbed her purse and her carry-on. "Where are you going?" Elliot asked, his voice weak. "I'm going to the St. Regis where my suite is booked," she spat. "You are not. I just called the hotel. I'm taking your name off the reservation. I am not spending one more second associated with this train wreck." "Tiffany, wait," he pleaded. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You humiliated yourself, Elliot. Fine. But you humiliated me. You made me look like the girlfriend of a fool. We are done." She didn't look back. She marched down the stairs and straight to the taxi stand, leaving him completely alone in the cabin of the jet he had so arrogantly tried to claim. Clara, the flight attendant, appeared at his side. Her professional smile was gone, replaced by a look of weary pity. "Mr. Vance," she said softly, "you'll need to deplane. The aircraft is being prepared for its next service." Numbly, Elliot gathered his things. He walked down the stairs, his feet feeling like lead. The sun was bright, glinting off the snow-capped mountains, but he felt a profound coldness deep in his bones. As he reached the tarmac, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He looked at the screen. The caller ID was one he had learned to dread since childhood. Richard Vance. He answered, his hand trembling. "Hello, Father." He didn't even get to finish the word. The roar that came through the phone was animalistic, a sound of pure, undiluted rage that decades of corporate polish couldn't contain. "You imbecile!" his father screamed, the phone speaker crackling under the strain. "You arrogant, worthless, idiotic fool! What have you done?" "Father, I can explain." "Explain? Don't you dare try to explain. I just got an email, Elliot. An email. Not a call, not a formal letter next week. An immediate ice-cold rejection from Seraphina James's office. Do you know what it said? It cited a fundamental misalignment of corporate values and an abhorrent lack of personal decency displayed by a senior representative of Vance Holdings. That's you. You are the senior representative. She was on the plane with you, wasn't she?" Elliot couldn't speak. He could only listen to the sound of his world being torn apart. "I spent a year trying to get this meeting," Richard Vance bellowed. "A year of begging, pleading, and restructuring just to get our proposal in front of her. We were hanging by a thread. And you, with your stupid inherited arrogance, you didn't just cut the thread, you set the whole damn rope on fire. She met you for 5 minutes and concluded our entire company culture was rotten to the core. And the worst part is, she's right. It is. You are living proof of it." The words hit Elliot harder than any physical blow ever could. "The board is calling for an emergency meeting," his father continued, his voice now dangerously low and cold. "The news of the Ethereum deal failing is going to leak by morning. Our stock will be worthless by noon. We're finished, Elliot. Decades of work, 3 generations, all wiped out because my son couldn't be a decent human being for 5 minutes." A pause. Elliot could hear his father's ragged breathing. "Don't bother coming back to the office," Richard said, his voice flat and dead. "You're fired. Your corporate accounts are frozen. Don't call me. Don't call your mother. You are on your own." The line went dead. Elliot stood alone on the tarmac in Aspen, the frigid mountain air doing nothing to numb the fire of humiliation that was consuming him. He had no hotel, no girlfriend, no job, and no family to call. He had flown here on a private jet, feeling like the king of the world. Now, he didn't even have enough money for a taxi back to the airport's main terminal. He was stranded, a pariah of his own creation. The karma hadn't just hit him, it had buried him in an avalanche. 3 months is a lifetime. Or, in the case of Elliot Vance, it was the time it took for one life to end and another, far grimmer one, to begin. The name Vance Holdings was already fading from the financial pages, a ghost of the market, a cautionary tale traded in the hushed, carnivorous whispers of Wall Street boardrooms. Richard Vance's predictions had not been wrathful exaggerations. They had been a precise and brutal forecast. The news of the failed Ethereum deal had been the single stone that started an avalanche, leading to a stock collapse so total and so swift that it left nothing but rubble. A rival firm had scavenged the wreckage, and the Vance dynasty, a 3-generation monolith of New York real estate and logistics, was gone. The man who now stood behind the brightly lit counter of a rental car agency at Denver International Airport bore little resemblance to the heir of that fallen empire. The arrogance that had once radiated from Elliot like a heat shimmer was gone, extinguished. The tailored Brioni suits had been replaced by a cheap, synthetic blend blue polo shirt that was perpetually staticky and khaki pants that never seemed to hold a crease. His face was thinner. The jawline that had once been sharp with entitlement was now softened by a constant, low-grade weariness. He was a ghost of a different sort, a ghost of his former self, haunting the purgatorial space of Concourse C. His days were a monotonous, soul-crushing loop. He'd wake to a shrill alarm in a cramped, beige apartment in Aurora, a place whose only virtue was its proximity to the airport rail line. He would look in the mirror and for a fleeting, sickening moment expect to see the confident master of the universe he once was, only to be confronted by the tired, hollowed-out eyes of this stranger who now wore his face. Life was a series of humbling transactions. He processed paperwork, explained insurance waivers with a rehearsed robotic script, and handed over keys to families excited for their ski vacation or businessmen rushing to a meeting. He, who had once flown over the country in a private jet, was now the facilitator of other people's journeys. He was a functionary, an invisible cog in a machine he once owned. The cruelest irony was dealing with men who reminded him of his father, or worse, of himself. Men who spoke with an easy, unthinking authority, who were impatient and dismissive. The old Elliot would have met their arrogance with his own, escalating the confrontation for the sheer sport of it. The new Elliot simply absorbed it. He'd nod, apologize for delays that weren't his fault, and say, with a practiced, empty smile, "I understand your frustration, sir. Let me see what I can do." He had become an expert in swallowing pride. It was his primary source of nourishment now. One slow Tuesday afternoon, the lull between the morning arrivals and the afternoon rush, Elliot retreated to the employee break room. The room was a small, windowless box that smelled of stale coffee, industrial floor cleaner, and the lingering ghost of microwaved popcorn. He sank into a wobbly plastic chair, the linoleum floor cold beneath his thin-soled shoes. On a small television, bolted to the wall, a local news program droned on, providing a meaningless flicker of color and sound. He stared at it without seeing it, his mind a dull hum of exhaustion. He was replaying the morning in his head. A customer had yelled at him for 10 minutes because the requested mid-size SUV wasn't available. Elliot had simply stood there, a human sponge for the man's rage, until a manager intervened. It was a scene that would have been inconceivable in his old life. Now, it was just Tuesday. He closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the wall. Then, a name cut through the noise, a name that made the fine hairs on his arms stand up. And here in Aspen, a major philanthropic announcement from Etherian Dynamics. Elliot's eyes snapped open. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The news anchor was standing in the brilliant mountain sun in front of a stunningly modern glass and steel building. And then the camera panned to the group at the podium. It was her, Seraphina James. She looked exactly as he remembered her from the plane. She was not dressed in overt luxury, but in an impeccably tailored navy blue dress that spoke of quiet confidence. Her hair was styled in the same elegant braids. She stood with a serene, unshakable poise that seemed to draw all the light and attention to her. Beside her, in a wheelchair, sat a frail but beaming elderly man. The reporter's voice continued. Tech billionaire and Etherian CEO Seraphina James was here today to dedicate the Dr. Eris Thorne Center for STEM Innovation, a state-of-the-art facility she funded to provide scholarships and mentorship for underprivileged students hoping to enter the fields of science and engineering. Elliot felt a cold dread mix with a morbid, paralyzing curiosity. He couldn't look away. He watched as Seraphina leaned down to say something to the man in the wheelchair, Dr. Thorne, her mentor, who smiled and placed a hand on her arm. It was a moment of profound, genuine connection, a moment of goodness. Then the reporter delivered the blow. It came not as a shout, but as a calm, professionally delivered piece of context that landed on Elliot with the force of a physical impact. When asked about the massive $200 million donation, James's office noted that a recent decision to scuttle a major corporate acquisition freed up significant capital, and Ms. James felt there was no better use for it than investing in the next generation of minds. The air left Elliot's lungs in a single ragged gasp. He felt the cheap plastic chair beneath him sway as if the very ground had become unstable. A recent decision to scuttle a major corporate acquisition. It wasn't just any acquisition, it was his acquisition. It was Vance Holdings. The money that was supposed to be the lifeline for his family, the capital that was meant to save their legacy, had not just disappeared into the ether. It had been rerouted, transmuted. His family's catastrophic failure had been the seed money for this beautiful, hopeful place. The ashes of his world had been used as fertilizer for hers. The karma was so precise, so poetically, devastatingly complete. It took his breath away. Serafina stepped to the podium to speak, and the broadcast carried her calm, clear voice into the miserable little break room. "True wealth isn't measured by what you own," she began, and every word was a surgical instrument dissecting Elliot's soul. "It's measured by what you contribute. It's about building bridges, not walls. It's about lifting people up, not putting them down." Lifting people up, not putting them down. The image of himself standing over her on the jet, sneering, gesturing to the back of the plane and saying, "Chop, chop," flashed in his mind with searing clarity. He had tried to put her down, to confine her to a smaller space, both physically and metaphorically. And in response, she had built this. Character, respect, humility. These are the only currencies that truly matter, she continued, her gaze sweeping over the crowd of bright-faced students who were the center's first recipients. They are the things my mentor, Dr. Thorne, taught me, and they are the values on which this center is built. The broadcast cut away to B-roll of the students, but Elliot could still see her face in his mind. He finally understood. The entire, horrifying encounter on the jet had been a test he didn't even know he was taking. He had revealed his character, and by extension, the character of the company he represented. He had shown her a fundamental lack of respect, a complete absence of humility, and she had made her decision based on that currency, the only one she truly valued. He had laughed at her seat, believing her place in a chair defined her place in the world. He now saw that he was the one who was small, trapped in the cramped, uncomfortable seat of his own character. Serafina James owned the jet, yes, but that was a trivial detail. What she truly owned was her life, her principles, her unassailable power, a power that came not from a name she inherited, but from a mind she had cultivated and a character she had forged. His power had been an illusion, a fragile construct of money and privilege. Hers was real. The news segment ended, transitioning to a fluffy piece about a skiing dog. The bright, idiotic music filled the silence. Elliot sat there for a long time, the television's cheerful noise a stark contrast to the profound, silent ruin in his heart. He thought of his father, a bitter, broken man aging rapidly in a rented condo in Florida. He thought of Tiffany, who, according to a gossip site he'd hate-read one night, was now happily planning a wedding to a European duke. And he thought of himself, here in this room, a man stripped of everything but the agonizing clarity of his own failure. He had learned his lesson. It was a lesson he would carry with him every single day for the rest of his life, every time he handed a key to a stranger, every time he forced a smile and swallowed his pride. It was a lesson that had cost him everything. Slowly, mechanically, he pushed himself up from the chair and walked back to the counter. Back to his new life, forever living in the quiet shadow of the day he tried to tell a queen to move from her throne. Elliot Vance learned a brutal lesson at 40,000 feet. The assumptions we make about others are often a reflection of our own deepest insecurities. He judged Seraphina James based on her appearance, completely blind to the fact that her character, intellect, and achievements had built a world he could only dream of inhabiting. His arrogance didn't just cost him a deal, it cost him his identity, his family's legacy, and his future. This story is a powerful reminder that wealth and status are not the same as character and respect. True power isn't loud and demanding. It's quiet, confident, and earned. It's in how we treat the person we believe has nothing to offer us that our true nature is revealed. If this story resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of karma and the importance of humility, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications for more real-life stories about when arrogance meets its match. Thank you for listening.